find yourself so focused on what's coming next that you miss what is happening now? When life is challenging, we can want to rush through the present in order to get to the future. Our desire to get out of whatever it is we're currently facing can actually cause us to miss out on what is happening now. So in this message, I want to share with you 3 simple things you can do to help you stay present in the moment and to get the most out of the now. I remember when Boris announced another lockdown for us at the start of this year. All I wanted to do was climb under my duvet and hibernate till spring. If I was given the chance to fast forward, I probably would have taken it. If I had a DeLorean with a flux capacitor, I'd have set it to 6 months in the future, found an open road and hit 88 miles an hour. Now, if you haven't seen Back to the Future, firstly, why not? And secondly, you haven't got a clue what I've just been going on about. If sci-fi films have taught me anything, it's that time travel rarely goes well. Whether it's going to the past or the future, invariably something goes wrong and the rest of the film is spent trying to undo what they did. If they just stayed in the present, they wouldn't have gotten into the mess that they found themselves in. Now, I wonder if there's some truth in there for us. I wonder what impact it would have on us if we were able to stay present in the present, instead of reliving the past or longing for the future. If you've seen the Back to the Future films, you will know that Marty spends his entire time jumping from one time to another. Going to the past, back to the present, into the future, back to the present, but it's changed for the worse, so he goes back to the past and then back to the present before going back to the past to come back to the present. Sounds exhausting and far-fetched. But is it? We do exactly the same thing. Well, okay, not exactly the same thing, but we do relive the past and we do long for the future instead of staying focused on the present. Now, I understand why we do this. I understand why we focus on the past or the future and neglect what is happening now. But the problem is, it doesn't help. We focus on the past because we either long to go back to a time when life was simpler or when we didn't have to face what we're currently facing. We focus on the past when we keep mulling over something. Perhaps it was an argument. We play it over and over again in our minds. We come up with better responses. Or perhaps it was something bad that happened. We allow ourselves to relive that moment over and over again. It's really important to learn from our past. We are who we are today because of what happened yesterday. But there's a big difference between learning from our past and reliving it, getting stuck in it. We are a product of our past, but we don't have to be prisoner to it. But perhaps you focus too much on the future, living for that holiday which might have to wait till next year again. Perhaps you're longing for things to change, so you look into the future, to that day when things will be different. You look to where the grass is greener. But experience shows us that the grass on the other side isn't greener, it's just spray painted. When you finally arrive on the other side or at that future you're longing for, more often than not, you realise that nothing much has changed because you are still you. Now, let me push this a little further. Often, the reason we want to move into the future is to escape how things are now. And often the reason we want to escape how things are now is because of something we've done that we regret, or because of how we responded to what's currently happening around us. When we eventually arrive in the future, we realise that nothing much has changed. We still make the same mistakes and we still react in the same way. The hard truth is, if we really do want our future to be different, if we want our future to change, we need to change. So how do we do that? How do we change? Well, first we need to work out what the issue is. What's broken that needs changing? I think a major reason we struggle to be present in the moment is because we lack contentment. We're not content with how things are, with how we are. We're not content with what has happened or with where we're heading. We're not content with what we have. We're not content with how things are now. I often find myself struggling with being content. I'm driven. I want to constantly grow and develop. I want us as a church to be constantly growing and developing. I believe in a sense of holy discontent. I believe a desire to be better is a good thing to have. But I also recognise there's a shadow side. There's a fine line with wanting to be better and never being content with how things are. There's a fine line with wanting to improve and never being satisfied or able to enjoy the now. When we feel content, we're satisfied and happy. And I think that's what we're all aiming for. We all want to be satisfied and happy. If I was satisfied and happy, I wouldn't need to time travel. I wouldn't need to dwell on the past or long for the future. I could be content with how things are now. So the big question is, how do I get there? I'm not content with how content I am. I have contempt for my levels of content. Well, let me share something with you that a guy called Paul wrote about this a long time ago. Paul wrote lots of the letters we find in the New Testament. In one letter in particular to a church in a place called Philippi, Paul said this: I have learned to be content with whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. And then we wait with bated breath for Paul to let us in on this secret, and he doesn't. And right there, we discover why we struggle with contentment. You know, Paul is telling us that he's learnt to be content. Through times of need and times of plenty, he has learned how to be content. He's discovered the secret to contentment. And we want him to tell us. We want him to do all the hard work and just let us know the secret so we can apply it to our lives too. But it doesn't work that way. You know, Paul isn't talking about a magic formula. He isn't saying that if you just do this one thing, you too can be content in whatever it is that you face. This isn't a revelation that he suddenly knows. It's something he's discovered, something he's learned over time. And if he was to tell us what the secret is, it wouldn't work for us because we have to learn it for ourselves. Contentment fundamentally is a choice. It's an attitude. We choose to be content. Contentment isn't found in what we have or don't have. You know, as soon as we start to put levels on it, we've missed the point. We think, if only I had this or that, then I would be content. We're not happy with what we have now, so we tell ourselves that if we had more than that, well, then that would be enough. Finally, we'd be able to be content. Now, I'm pretty sure you can see through that logic. You know as well as I do that as soon as we have whatever it is we were hoping would bring us contentment, we would want more. Paul has learned to be content in times of need and times of plenty. Now, which one do you think was hardest to learn? Times of plenty. It causes us to want more. It's really difficult to learn contentment in times of plenty. But the good news is that it's possible. Paul did it. Now, I know that I don't know your situation. I don't know what you're facing, but I imagine just by the fact that you're in a place where you are able to watch this video, that you are closer to being in times of plenty than in times of need. It can be difficult for us to recognize this because we have the bad habit of comparing up. We look at what we have and we compare it to people who have more. Now, rarely do we compare down. This starts at an early age. Give two kids a slice of cake of different sizes and you know what's going to happen. The one with the smaller cake will complain that their slice isn't as big as the other. The one with the large slice will not say a word. You know, nobody ever complains that their cake is larger than someone else's. Well, unless it's a mushroom cake, of course. So how do we learn the secret to being content with whatever we have, like Paul did? Well, let me suggest 3 things you can do. Firstly, pause. Stop. Not all the time, but some of the time. Find time to stop. Time to hit the pause button. Time to make sure you are in the present. To be present with the people you love. To be aware of and enjoy God's presence. You know, go for a walk, sit on a bench, enjoy the view. And as you pause, ask yourself this question: what does God think about what I have? How content does God want me to be with what I have? Now, that's a really challenging question to ask because I think we already know the answer. God wants us to be content with what we have, whether that is a time of plenty or a time of need. And if God wants us to be content with what we have, He will help us learn how to be content. But it is something we have to learn for ourselves over time. You know, it won't happen in an instant. Secondly, ponder. Now, what are the things that are really important? What are the values you want to hold on to and build your life around? What are the things you've embraced in this season that you want to take with you into the next? You know, if you don't identify them, you will lose them in the whirlwind of life. So take stock. Identify what are the things that are really important, and then you can begin to prioritize them. And thirdly, pursue. You know, when you know what is really important to you, you can pursue it. Do the things you love to do. What does it look like for you to pursue God and the things He has for you? As you do that, you can also take pleasure in what you do have, rather than longing for the things you don't have. Pursuing what's important is also about embracing and embedding the values that are important. This doesn't happen by itself. It takes intentionality. Being content is about more than just what we have or don't have. You know, are you content with how things are? Are you content with how you are or who you are? I think this is where that sense of holy discontent comes in. Is God content with how things are? Is God content with how I am? If you were to do a character study on Paul, you'd see that he's content with what he has, but he isn't always content with how things are or how he is. Early on in his ministry, he wasn't content with the way the church was focused on reaching Jewish people, but not anyone else. Gentiles is the term used that refers to someone who isn't Jewish. Paul wasn't content with this. He spoke out against it, and he did something about it. He actually changed his name from Saul to Paul. Paul is the Greek version of Saul, his Hebrew Jewish name. Paul also reached out to the Gentiles. He planted churches in non-Jewish communities. The spread of the gospel throughout the world happened because Paul was not content with how things were. And the reason why Paul was not content with how things were was because God wasn't content either. Paul also was often not content with how he was. In another letter, he talks about the struggle he has with doing the things he doesn't want to do. He knows what he should and shouldn't do, but he often finds himself doing the things he knows he shouldn't do, and he neglects the things he knows he should do. Does that sound familiar? I think having a sense of holy discontent is a good thing. I think looking at our world and ourselves through God's eyes is a good thing to do. Just as you ask yourself, what does God think about what I have? Ask yourself, what does God think about who I am and how things are? As you prayerfully ask that question, allow yourself to be guided and led by God. Allow Him to highlight where you should be content and where you should allow His holy discontent to move you. Throughout the Gospels, we see Jesus speaking out against injustice, inequality, and oppression. Like Paul, he spoke out and acted against the inward dynamic of the established religion that sought to keep people on the outside out. Those are the things we should not be content about. You know, what are the things about our world that you would like to see changed in the future? What are the things about who you are that you would like to see change in the future? What are the aspects of what you think, say, and do that you are not currently content with? Paul's big secret to discovering contentment was a word we all love: discipline. He had made the choice to allow himself to be content with whatever he had, and he also made the choice to allow God to give him a sense of holy discontent. This isn't a one-off choice, it's a daily thing, at all times and in all places. You know, that takes discipline. We can all make bold claims and start new regimes, but it takes discipline to see them through. And because of this discipline, whilst Paul might not have been content with who he was content with who he was becoming. And he was content with the trajectory he was on. But he would only stay on that trajectory if he continued to make this choice, to allow God to drive his sense of discontentment. So are you content with who you're becoming? If not, what can you do about that? What discipline can you embrace to get you on the right trajectory? Now, I know that sounds like hard work. I know it looks like an uphill battle, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's not possible. It's not possible to be content with what I have and to allow God to work in me to give me a holy discontent for how things are and for how I am. But Paul has something else to say on this. He ends this train of thought by saying, I can do all things through Jesus who gives me strength. Paul isn't saying that Jesus does all the hard work so he doesn't have to. He's saying that because of Jesus, in Jesus and through his relationship with Jesus, he can do these things. In fact, anything that Paul faces, he faces with Jesus. The good news is that you can too. You can do these things through the strength that Jesus offers you if you choose to trust him and follow him. If you want to be fully present today so you are able to change your tomorrow, you can do that if you lean into Jesus. This again is a choice. It's a discipline. It's something you have to learn for yourself. But the more you do it, the more natural it will become. So let's just break the rule and fast forward a moment. And I want you to imagine that you've embraced this discipline. I want you to imagine that you've allowed God to speak into your contentment, that you've allowed yourself to be content with what you have, whatever it is, and you have allowed God to move you on the things that you shouldn't be content with. Imagine you've taken time to pause, to ponder, and to pursue. What impact has that had on your life? How has it changed your outlook, your attitudes, your values, and your actions? How has it shifted the person you are becoming? If we want our future to be different, we need to be different. Allow God to help you to be present in the moment in order to change your future. Recognize that you too can do all things through Jesus, who gives you strength.